Okay, well, welcome back to episode 26. This is really going to be the last of the testimonies that Paul is going to give before they're going to ship him off to Rome because he has requested to take his case before Caesar. And so today we're going to talk about Agrippa. And I have to apologize. Last week, I think I mentioned King Agrippa the first and King Agrippa the second, and I really was kind of way off as I've been preparing for today's episode. I went back and studied the family line of Herod the Great, and so I want to kind of explain things. So you had Herod the Great, then his son Archelaus, and then you had Herod Agrippa the first, which was Herod the Great's grandson, and then you had Herod Agrippa the second. And all four of these people are in the Bible, and they all play a role at different times in biblical history. And so I want to kind of go through this and explain who the Herods are and what their roles were and how they all uh, function through all of this. One of the things I love about studying the Bible is comparing, the scripture with his history, with historical records, and we see all of this history taking place around what's going on in Jerusalem. It to me, it just makes it all come that much more alive, and it's that much more fascinating. And so I hope I can express the fascination I have with it to you so that you'll be interested. But we're going to look at that before Herod the Great came to power, though. Before the Romans came to power, the Greeks ruled, and so the Greeks had a different style. Of course, they came in, they shut down the temple. Of course, you had Maccabee, who led the Maccabean revolt, and he he was successful in reopening the temple. And at that time, that's kind of when uh, we talked when we talked about the Sanhedrin transitioned from a time when the high priest sat over the Sanhedrin council to a time when it was more of a political leader, maybe somebody from well, it was a descendant line of David that kind of served in that role, and that kind of all happened after the Maccabean revolt when they restored the temple. So there's a little of that. I'm going to play a short clip of a video, so maybe about 3 minutes, that talks about the Greek rule. Because during this rule, once the Maccabean revolts were ended, they retake the temple. The Sadducees and Pharisees just kept mixing it up, and so they were killing each other for power. It was terrible. And this video don't go into that much detail, but you can see in the video that there's definitely this power play between the Sadducees and Pharisees. Of course, by the time the Romans come to power, Jerusalem was just a mess. I mean, they had all this stuff going on. It was like a civil war within the temple, basically, and so they had just had a lot of mess going on, and so they established a regent king to rule over the area, which was Herod the Great. And so that'll bring us into that. So I'm gonna play this clip of the Greek rule so you can kind of see what's happened, and then we'll talk about each of these Herods and the role that they played in biblical history. And then, of course, Herod Agrippa the second was the one that Paul was brought before to give his account. So let me go to this video real quick and play a few minutes of this.
Point, the foreign power controlling Judea has changed, and it is now the Greek Seleucids who are in charge. However, not all Jews were happy with the increased Hellenization promoted by the Seleucids, and things finally came to a breaking point when the Seleucid king Antiochus Epiphanes shut down the Jewish temple in 167. At this point, the Oniads fled to Egypt and built another temple there, while a member of a different priestly family, named Mattathias, launched a resistance movement in Judea in the hopes of achieving Jewish independence. Eventually, Mattathias' son Judah Maccabee recaptured Jerusalem from the Seleucids and reconsecrated the Jewish temple, a story that today is remembered through the holiday of Hanukkah. Judah thus became the first high priest of the Hasmonean dynasty. Note that the name Maccabee, while often applied to all of Mattathias' son, was actually just a nickname held by Judah only. In English, it means the hammer, Hamaccabi. So the name of the dynasty is not the Maccabean dynasty, it's the Hasmonean dynasty named after their ancestor Asmoneus. Judah Maccabee was actually killed in combat before the end of the revolt, and the high priesthood went to another family for a while before returning to the Hasmoneans in 153, when it was given to Judah's younger brother Jonathan Aphus, and then later to their brother Simon Tassi, who also proclaimed himself Prince of Judea. In 134, Simon was assassinated along with his two eldest sons, so both positions fell to his youngest son John. John had been raised in the expectation that he would never have any power, so he began his rule woefully unprepared, but eventually rose to secure full independence for Judea and lead a number of conquests against the now collapsing Seleucid Empire, taking the regnal name Hyrcanus I. Hyrcanus' son, Aristobulus I, continued these conquests, but created some major political problems when he crowned himself king of Judea rather than prince. This is because, according to the biblical book of Numbers, there needed to be a strict separation between the crown and the high priesthood. Aristobulus died less than a year after taking power, but the issue of crown and temple would haunt the Hasmonean dynasty for a long time, as we'll see. Originally, Aristobulus had willed his titles to his brother Antigonus, but Antigonus was killed in a coup led by Aristobulus's wife Salome Alexandra, who, after Aristobulus's death, married Aristobulus's younger brother Alexander. However, Alexander was an unpopular tyrant who caused a civil war, and while he and his allied political party, the Sadducees, won that civil war, their victory was rapidly undone in a soft coup by Salome and her allies the Pharisees, which ended up with Salome as the real power behind the throne. When Alexander died in 76, Salome was crowned as Queen Alexandra, and it was under her that Judea reached its peak of power and prestige. Under Alexandra's reign, the high priesthood was reformed from a purely hereditary position to an elected one, though one still had to be of priestly blood to be eligible, and the position was given to her eldest son Hyrcanus II, with her younger son Aristobulus II to become king, thus separating the crown and the priesthood. However, this ended up not happening, because Aristobulus was an ally of the now marginalized Sadducees. So another civil war erupted, in which Hyrcanus II ruled as king and high priest for a year before being overthrown by Aristobulus. This war quickly ground to a stalemate, which was finally broken by the Roman leader Pompey the Great.
Okay, so Pompey came in, and of course, once the Romans took over, they excuse me, they appointed Herod the Great here. Now, Herod the Great ruled until 4 BC. I think this is why most Bible scholars think that Christ was born in 4 BC, because Herod the Great died in 4 BC. All of his successors, their times that they came to power is 4 BC. And so he is the one that ordered the killing of the children when Jesus was born. Remember, the wise men came and told him, and we're going to read that account here in a minute. But so Herod the Great basically was a part of the Second Temple period, and he became the ruler there in that region. He was like a regent king. It says here he appears in the Christian Gospel of Matthew as the ruler of Judea who orders the massacre of innocents at the time of Jesus' birth. Now, this says that Herod's biographers don't believe the event occurred because it's not recorded. Now here's the thing with this event. First of all, you got to take into consideration that all societies aren't like ours. So a lot of societies, when you're born, you're in your first year. And I mean, there isn't a year zero for our society. When you're born, you're 2 months old, 3 months old, 6 months old. But in their society, you were in your first year. So by the time you became two, you were basically just learning how to walk and talk. It was the end of your first year. On your first birthday, after your birth, then you became two. And so it's not like he was going around killing 300-400 children that were running around walking and talking and playing. Bethlehem was a very, very small village, and the chances of there being infants that small, you know, if there were half a dozen, that would be a lot in that small village of newborn boys that were of that age. And so I just think that it was really such a small number. The Bible records it because Jesus, the King of the Jews, was the mark. He was the one that they were trying to kill. So, but the rest of society, I mean, it really wasn't that big a deal. Kings ordered people to be killed all the time. And so I don't think it was that big a deal. It wasn't recorded in their books because it was so few people. But the devil doesn't want you to believe the Bible, or he at least wants you to doubt things. And sometimes you just got to lean back on that scripture, lean not on your own understanding, but in all your ways acknowledge him. Just because we don't understand why something doesn't quite measure up doesn't mean that God doesn't understand. So I definitely think that the killing of these children occur, even though it's not recorded in historical documents, just because it was such a small number. But Herod the Great was the one that did that, and right after that, he went to Jericho and got sick and died. And so you see down here as we look at his death. Herod died in Jericho after an extraordinarily painful illness, and so some folks have suggested that it was kidney failure. I mean, I don't know if there's a way to confirm how he died, but he died really really quickly. And so I want to read this account in Matthew real quick, just so you can kind of follow along with these kings. It says, when Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, the days of Herod the king. Behold, there came wise men from the east, saying, where is he that is born King of the Jews? For we have seen the star, and we have come to worship him. And when Herod the king heard these things, he was troubled, all Jerusalem with him. And when he gathered all the chief priests and scribes and people together, he demanded of them where Christ should be born. And they said unto him, Bethlehem of Judea, for thus it is written by the prophet, and thou, Bethlehem, in the land of Judea, art not the least among the princes of Judea, for out of thee shall come a governor that shall rule my people. So that's the prophecy from the Old Testament. Says verse 7, Herod then, when he had privately called the wise men, inquired of them diligently what time the star appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem and said, go search diligently for the young child. When you have found them, bring me word that I may come worship also. And when they heard the king, they departed. And lo, the star which they saw in the east went before them till it came and stood over where the young child was. And when they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceeding joy. And when they were come to the house, they saw the young child with Mary his mother, and fell down and worshipped him. And when they had opened their treasures, they presented him gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And then, being warned of God in a dream that they should not return to Herod, they departed into their own country another way. And when they had departed, behold, the angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph, saying, arise and take the young child and his mother, and flee into Egypt, and be thou there until I bring word, for Herod will seek the young child to destroy him. And so it says he arose and took the young child and his mother by night and departed to Egypt. And so uh, that's kind of where we see the biblical recording. It's not recorded to record what Herod did. It's recorded to show how God protected the Messiah, is what's going on here. And so Herod died in 4 BC, right after that event, and this son Herod Archelaus took over. And you can see here his reign was very short. He was hated by everybody, and so he has a biblical reference here. He's mentioned in the Gospel of Matthew, says the angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and told him to take Mary and Jesus and flee to Egypt and avoid the massacre. And when Herod the Great died, Joseph was told by an angel in a dream to return to the land of Israel. However, upon hearing that Archelaus had succeeded his father as ruler in Judea, he was afraid to go there and was again warned in a dream to turn aside to the region of Galilee. And so he goes into Galilee. And this also, there's a parable where Jesus speaks in Luke chapter 19 that may refer to Archelaus' journey to Rome. And we'll read that too real quick. Um, well, here it is. A nobleman went to a far country to receive for himself a kingdom and then return. But the citizens hated him and sent a delegation after him, saying, we do not want this man to reign over us. But as for these enemies of mine, saith the nobleman, who did not want me to reign over them, bring them here and slaughter them and before me. And so there's suggestion that this Jesus is speaking of this ruler Archelaus. So let's read in Matthew here real quick as we go on. So they're in Egypt, and verse 15 says, and They were there until the death of Herod, that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken of the Lord by the prophet, saying, "Out of Egypt I call my son." And then Herod, when he saw that he was mocked of the wise men, and exceedingly wroth, he sent forth, slew all the children that were in Bethlehem and all the coast thereof, and from 2 years old and under, according to the time which he had diligently inquired the wise men, that it was fulfilled, spoken by the prophet, saying, "In Ramah there was a voice heard, lamentation and weeping, and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children that could not be comforted." Now, I was going to show you this picture because Bethlehem is right here by the West Bank, and so if he killed all the children, see Jerusalem up there. So if he killed all the Jerusalem from Bethlehem to the coast, I mean, there really is nothing in here. This is the West Bank, and so it's a sandy area, and there wasn't any. So Bethlehem was just this tiny little village where he was killing people. Verse 19 says, "When Herod was dead, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt, saying, Arise, take the young child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel, for they are dead which sought the young child's life. And he arose, took the child and his mother, and came to the land of Israel. And when he had heard that Archelaus did reign in Judea in the room of his father Herod, he was afraid to go hither. Notwithstanding, being warned of God in a dream, he turned aside in the parts of Galilee, and he came and dwelt in the city called Nazareth." And so you can also see uh, on this map, and we're in Caesarea here. Paul's still here being tried, and so but you see Judea is here, which is where they were headed, but they avoided that and went on north to Galilee to avoid this ruler. And so that's the account here of how they ended up in Galilee. And so uh, later on, Herod Agrippa I came to power in 41 AD. But at the time of Jesus' crucifixion, he was serving as a city magistrate. And I'm going to kind of explain some of this. This video might be a little longer than the last one, but so basically, Herod Agrippa I was raised in Rome, but he married this woman, Cypros, who was friends with uh, Herodias. And so his wife got along with Herodias. Now, you might remember Herodias in the Bible. Herodias was the woman that she had married her uncle, and then she left him and married her other uncle. And she was the one that John the Baptist declared a harlot woman. And so she wanted to kill John the Baptist. That's who Herodias was. And and so Agrippa the first, his wife, was friends with her. And so when Antipas was ruler over the region, he made um, Agrippa a magistrate of the area. And so um, we see here Herodias leads Antipas to help Agrippa. He provides him with money, offers him to settle in Tiberias, and trusts him with the civic magistracy. And so he's kind of the magistrate. And so when Pontius Pilate, Herodias was, or Agrippa was also accused of taking bribes. And so a lot of people had turned against him. He was unhappy here and didn't stay for very long before he went back uh, to Rome. But you see here shortly after, he was disgraced following intervention of his own brother, who denounced him for receiving a bribe to defend the interest of Damascus. And so he him and Pontius Pilate didn't get along until this time when they were communicating this deal with Jesus. And so the Bible says that they had gotten along a little better. And I was going to read uh, on here a little further. Let's see here if I can bring this up. It says the whole multitude arose and led Pilate, and they began to accuse him. And this is the high priest. They took Jesus to Pilate. They accused him, said, "We found this fellow perverting the nation, forbidding to give tribute to Caesar, saying that he is a king." Pilate asked him, "Art thou a king?" And he said, "Thou sayest." And Pilate said to the chief priest and to the people, "I find no fault." And they were more fierce, saying, "He stirred up the people, teaching throughout all the Jews, beginning with Galilee, to this place." And when Pilate heard he was a Galilee, he asked whether the man was a Galilean. And as soon as he knew that he belonged to Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who himself was also at Jerusalem at the time. And when Herod saw Jesus, he was exceedingly glad, for he was desirous to see him. of a long season because he had heard many things to him and he hoped to have seen some miracle done by him. And he questioned him in many words, but answered nothing. And the chief priests and scribes stood venomously, accused him. And Herod with his men set of war set him at naught and mocked him and arrayed him in glorious robe and sent him back to Pilate. And that same day, Pilate and Herod were made friends together, for before they were enmity between themselves. And so that's the account of that, how they kind of came together through that. And then we see later on King Agrippa the second came to power, and he would have been just a child. He was born around 27 AD, so he'd have been 4, 5, 6 years old at the time Jesus came to see his father. So he knew of Jesus, probably heard of the crucifixion, and so I think now in this account that we have uh, in the Bible in Matthew, um, that he or in Acts that he was just had this curiosity to know, and so it's really covered in Acts. I think it's 26 and 25 and 26 if you want to go read it. I'm not going to read through all of it because it's basically the same thing. He's basically telling Agrippa, you know, the history of the Jews and how Jesus was the Messiah, and Jesus called him to be his servant, and so he did not uh, deny him that, and now the Jews hate him for it. And basically, Agrippa II said, "You almost convinced me to be a Christian." I mean, it's pretty fascinating. I just don't have time to read 2 more chapters today, but go read chapters 25 and 26 of Acts, and you'll see. And so, and Agrippa II also said, if he had not, asked to see the Caesar, we could have freed him today. So Agrippa was that determined to have freed him. Another thing about Agrippa II, he was in power until the uprising. There was another uprising in 66 AD. The Jews rose up against the Romans, and that's when Agrippa II fled for fear of his life, and the Romans basically come in after that in 70 AD and destroyed the city, destroyed everything. Just the nation of Israel was just conquered completely. But so Rome, Herod Agrippa II was the last known king of the region. But so that's a little bit on the history and where we're at. Next week, we're going to see Paul being freed, not being freed, but being put in a place of another Roman century and taken onto a ship, and he's going to be shipwrecked on the island of Malta. So next week is a really exciting episode too. So go back and read Acts 25, 26, and see Paul's testimony to Herod Agrippa II, and check out these works on I'll put in the description box down below. All right. Thanks for joining me today. We'll see you next week. God bless you.